Hi guys, how you doing? We're gonna continue reading of Mice and Men. Don't forget you have this on Bookshare. We're starting chapter 2, but we're gonna listen to the end of chapter 1. I hope you got the characters down. We're gonna go to the bunkhouse in the farm, and don't forget George and Lenny had to leave Weed because Lenny had a problem in Weed. He likes to pet soft things. We heard a lot about that and mouse and rabbits. And we know he has a developmental disability, Lenny, but don't forget this is back in the 30s and life was very different for them. We're going to be introduced to the men at the ranch, the bunkhouse, not good living conditions. Think of it as like an army barrack. And George is not going to be happy when he finds something there. We're going to meet the old swamper whose name is Candy. There's a lot of nicknames in this, and we'll talk more about that. So let's just listen to the end of chapter 1, beginning of chapter 2, and then I'll pause and give you information as we go through it.
Lenny, if you just happen to get in trouble like you always done before, I want you to come right here and hide in the brush. Hide in the brush, said Lenny slowly. Hide in the brush till I come for you. Can you remember that? Sure I can, George. Hide in the brush till you come. But you ain't gonna get in no trouble, because if you do, I won't let you tend the rabbits. He threw his empty bean can off into the brush. I won't get in no trouble, George. I ain't gonna say a word. Okay. Bring your bindle over here by the fire. It's gonna be nice sleeping here, looking up in the leaves. Don't build up no more fire. We'll let her die down. They made their beds on the sand, and as the blaze dropped from the fire, the sphere of light grew smaller. The curling branches disappeared, and only a faint glimmer showed where the tree trunks were. From the darkness, Lenny called, George, you asleep? No. What do you want? Let's have different colored rabbits, George. Sure we will, George said sleepily. Red and blue and green rabbits, Lenny. Millions of them. Furry ones, George, like I seen in the fair in Sacramento. Sure, furry ones. 'Cause I can just as well go away, George, and live in a cave. You can just as well go to hell, said George. Shut up now. The red light dimmed on the coals. Up the hill from the river, a coyote yammered, and a dog answered from the other side of the stream. The sycamore leaves whispered in a little night breeze. The bunkhouse was a long, rectangular building. Inside, the walls were whitewashed and the floor unpainted. In 3 walls, there were small, square windows, and in the 4th, a solid door with a wooden latch. Against the walls were 8 bunks, 5 of them made up with blankets and the other 3 showing their burlap ticking. Over each bunk there was nailed an apple box with the opening forward, so that it made 2 shelves for the personal belongings of the occupant of the bunk. And these shelves were loaded with little articles, soap and talcum powder, razors, and those Western magazines ranchmen love to read and scoff at and secretly believe. And there were medicines on the shelves, and little vials, combs, and from nails on the box sides, a few neckties. Near one wall there was a black cast-iron stove, its stovepipe going straight up through the ceiling. In the middle of the room stood a big, square table littered with playing cards, and around it were grouped boxes for the players to sit on. At about 10 o'clock in the morning, the sun threw a bright, dust-laden bar through one of the side windows, and in and out of the beam, flies shot like rushing stars. The wooden latch raised. The door opened, and a tall, stoop-shouldered old man came in. He was dressed in blue jeans, and he carried a big push broom in his left hand. Behind him came George, and behind George, Lenny. The boss was expecting you last night, the old man said. He was sore as hell when he wasn't here to go out this morning. He pointed with his right arm, and out of the sleeve came a round stick-like wrist, but no hand. You can have them 2 bunks there. he said, indicating 2 bunks near the stove. George stepped over and threw his book.
Okay, so you're gonna fill out your character sheet for his name is Candy. They call him the old swamper. And here's his description, and I want you to pay attention to what comes out of his sleeve. He's missing something. All right, but I'm not going to tell you. I want you to tell me. He's hunched over. They call him the old swamper because his job is to clean out the bunks and the area where all the men sleep.
Blankets down on the burlap sack of straw that was a mattress. He looked into his box shelf and then picked a small yellow can from it. Say, what the hell's this? I don't know, said the old man. Says positively kills lice, roaches, and other scourges. What the hell kind of beds you giving us anyways? We don't want no pants rabbits. The old swamper shifted his broom and held it between his elbow and his side while he held out his hand for the can. He studied the label carefully. Tell you what, he said finally. Last guy that had this bed was a blacksmith. Hell of a nice fella and as clean a guy as you want to meet. Used to wash his hands even after he ate. And how come he got graybacks?
It's another word for lice.
George was working up a slow anger. Lenny put his bindle on the neighboring bunk and sat down. He watched George with open mouth. Tell you what, said the old swamper. This here blacksmith, named Whitey, was the kind of guy that would put this stuff around even if there wasn't no bugs. Just to make sure, see? Tell you what he used to do. At meals, he'd peel his boiled potatoes, and he'd take out every little spot, no matter what kind, before he'd eat it. And if there was a red splotch on an egg, he'd scrape it off. Finally quit about the food. That's the kind of guy he was. Clean. Used to dress up Sundays even when he wasn't going no place. Put on a necktie even, and then set in the bunkhouse. I ain't so sure, said George skeptically. What'd you say he quit for? The old man put the yellow can in his pocket, and he rubbed his bristly white whiskers with his knuckles. Why, he just quit, the way a guy will. Says it was the food. Just wanted to move, didn't give no other reason but the food. Just says, give me my time one night, the way any guy would. George lifted his tick and looked underneath it. He leaned over and inspected the sacking closely. Immediately, Lenny got up and did the same with his bed. Finally, George seemed satisfied. He unrolled his bindle and put things on the shelf, his razor and a bar of soap, his comb and a bottle of pills, his liniment and leather wristband. Then he made his bed up neatly with blankets. The old man said, I guess the boss will be out here in a minute. He was sure burned when he wasn't here this morning. Come right in when we was eating breakfast and says, where the hell's them new men? He give the stable buck hell, too. George patted a wrinkle out of his bed and sat down. Give the stable buck hell? He asked. Sure. You see, stable buck's a nigger. Nigger, huh? Yeah. Nice fella, too. Got a crooked back where a horse kicked him. The boss gives him hell when he's mad, but the stable buck don't give a damn about that. He reads a lot and got books in his room. What kind of guy is the boss? George asked. Well,
okay. We know that N-word is offensive. Steinbeck uses it as a sign of the times for the book. The stable buck is the guy who lives in the stables, and because of the times in the 30s, slavery was no longer around, but segregation was, especially in the South. So this is in California, and the stable buck's name is Crooks. So you can look at him on the character sheet and start filling in some details about him. So here's some more details about Crooks.
He's a pretty nice fella. Gets pretty mad sometimes, but he's pretty nice. Tell you what, know what he done Christmas? Bring a gallon of whiskey right in here and says, drink hearty, boys. Christmas comes but once a year. Hell, he did. A whole gallon? Yes, sir. Jesus, we had fun. They let the nigger come in that night. Little Skinner named Smitty took after the nigger. Done pretty good, too. Guys wouldn't let him use his feet, so the nigger got him. If he could have used his feet, Smitty said he would have killed the nigger. The guy said on account of the nigger's got a crooked back, Smitty can't use his feet. He paused in relish of the memory. After that, the guys went into Soledad and raised hell. I didn't go in there. I ain't got the poop no more. Lenny was just finishing making his bed. The wooden latch
So just so we're clear, the N word is highly offensive. It's left in for the reason of it's the sign of the times, and we need to understand the setting and where these men thought and how they spoke, and they thought that was okay. We do know that it's completely unacceptable, that word, and offensive. But again, we're reading a piece of literature that was written back during this time. So, like I said, no excuse. Find the word offensive, but it is in this story.
Raised again, and the door opened. A little stocky man stood in the open doorway. He wore blue jean trousers, a flannel shirt, a black unbuttoned vest, and a black coat. His thumbs were stuck in his belt on each side of a square steel buckle. On his head was a soiled brown Stetson hat, and he wore high-heeled boots and spurs to prove he was not a laboring man. The old swamper looked quickly at him, and then shuffled to the door, rubbing his whiskers with his knuckles as he went. "Them guys just come," he said, and shuffled past the boss and out the door. The boss stepped into the room with the short, quick steps of a fat-legged man. "I rode Murray and Reddy. I wanted 2 men this morning. You got your work slips?" George reached into his pocket and produced the slips and handed them to the boss. "Wasn't Murray and Reddy's fault. Says right on the slip you was supposed to be here for work this morning." George looked down at his feet. "Bus driver give us a bum steer," he said. "We had to walk 10 miles. Says we was here when we wasn't. Couldn't get no rides this morning." The boss squinted his eyes. "Well, I had to send out the grain team short 2 buckers. Won't do any good to go out now till after dinner." He pulled his time book out of his pocket and opened it where a pencil was stuck between the leaves. George scowled meaningfully at Lenny, and Lenny nodded to show that he understood. The boss licked his pencil. "What's your name?" "George Milton." "What's yours?" George said. "His name's Lenny Small." The names were entered in the book. "Let's see. This is the 20th. Noon the 20th. He closed the book. "Where you boys been working?"
Okay, so one of the questions asks you what their last names are. George and Milton. We're going to talk a little bit of significance of George's name, but Lenny, definitely his name is significant, especially his last name is Small. We talked a lot about irony. So, what would be ironic about Lenny's last name of Small when you look at his physical description?
"I'm Weed," said George. "You too?" to Lenny. "Yeah, him too," said George. The boss pointed a playful finger at Lenny. "He ain't much of a talker, is he?" "No, he ain't, but he's sure a hell of a good worker. Strong as a bull." Lenny smiled to himself. "Strong as a bull," he repeated. George scowled at him, and Lenny dropped his head in shame at having forgotten. The boss said suddenly, "Listen, Small." Lenny raised his head. "What can you do?" In a panic, Lenny looked at George for help. "He can do anything you tell him," said George. "He's a good skinner. He can wrestle grain bags, drive a cultivator. He can do anything. Just give him a try." The boss turned on George. "And why don't you let him answer? What you trying to put over?" George broke in loudly. "Oh, I ain't saying he's bright. He ain't. But I say he's a goddamn good worker. He can put up a 400-pound bale." The boss deliberately put the little book in his pocket. He hooked his thumbs in his belt and squinted, one eye nearly closed. "Say, what you selling?" "Huh?" I said, "What stake you got in this guy? You taking his pay from him?" "No, of course I ain't." "Why, you think I'm selling him out?" "Well, I never seen one guy take so much trouble for another guy. I'd just like to know what your interest is." George said, "He's my cousin. I told his old lady I'd take care of him. He got kicked in the head by a horse when he was a kid. He's all right, just ain't bright. But he can do anything you tell him." The boss turned half away. Well, God knows he don't need any brains to buck barley bags. But don't you try to put nothing over, Milton. I got my eye on you. Why'd you quit and weed? Job was done, said George promptly. What kind of job? We was digging a cesspool. All right. But don't try to put nothing over, 'cause you can't get away with nothing. I've seen wise guys before. Going out with the grain teams after dinner, or picking up barley at the threshing machine. Go out with Slim's team. Slim? Yeah. Big, tall Skinner. You'll see him at dinner. He turned abruptly and went to the door, but before he went out, he turned and looked for a long moment at the two men.
Okay, so a couple of different points here that are really important to make. Um, Men did not travel together in this time. It was very much every man for himself. So they're very suspicious. George lies and says he's his cousin. Then he also says that he's been kicked in the head by a mule, um, which is kind of really mean because that's not true. But he wants them to hire him. Um, this is a tough job. They're out on the fields and bucking barley. We mean lifting enormous, heavy bags of barley and out in the fields. It's really, really hard work. Um, Slim is another one of the people that's in your character sheet, and he is the Skinner, which means he runs the mule team. They had teams of horses. I'm sorry, not horses, teams of mules that they would use to pull the things in and out, the machinery and stuff out, and he would almost like use a little whip thing to get the mules going, and so he's called a jerk line Skinner, and his name is Slim. Again, more nicknames. All right, so let's listen to the rest of this.
The sound of his footsteps had died away. George turned on Lenny. So, you wasn't going to say a word? You was going to leave your big flappers shut and leave me do the talking. Damn near lost us the job. Lenny stared hopelessly at his hands. I forgot, George. Yeah, you forgot. You always forget, and I got to talk you out of it. He sat down heavily on the bunk. Now he's got his eye on us. Now we got to be careful and not make no slips. You keep your big flappers shut after this. He fell morosely silent. George, what you want now? I wasn't kicked in the head with no horse, was I, George? Be a damn good thing if you was, said George viciously. Save everybody a hell of a lot of trouble. You said I was your cousin, George. Well, that was a lie. I'm damn glad it was. If I was a relative of yours, I'd shoot myself. He stopped suddenly, stepped to the open front door, and peered out. Say, what the hell you doing listening? The old man came slowly into the room. He had his broom in his hand, and at his heels there walked a drag-footed sheepdog, gray of muzzle and with pale, blind old eyes. The dog struggled lamely to the side of the room and lay down, grunting softly to himself and licking his grizzled, moth-eaten coat. The swamper watched him until he was settled. I wasn't listening. I was just standing in the shade a minute scratching my dog. I just now finished swamping out the wash house. You was poking your big ears into our business, George said. I don't like nobody getting nosy. The old man looked uneasily from George to Lenny and then back. I just come there, he said. I didn't hear nothing you guys was saying. I ain't interested in nothing you was saying. A guy on a ranch don't never listen nor he don't ask no questions. Damn right he don't, said George, slightly mollified. Not if he wants to stay working long. But he was reassured by the swamper's defense. Come on in, sit down a minute, he said. That's a hell of an old dog. Yeah, I had him ever since he was a pup. God, he was a good sheepdog when he was younger. He stood his broom against the wall and he rubbed his white bristled cheek with his knuckles. How'd you like the boss? He asked. Pretty good, seemed all right. He's a nice fella, Swamper agreed. You got to take him right. And at that moment, a young man came into the bunkhouse, A thin young man with a brown face, with brown eyes, and a head of tightly curled hair. He wore a work glove on his left hand, and like the boss, he wore high-heeled boots. "See my old man?" he asked. The swamper said, "He's here just a minute ago, Curly. Went over to the cookhouse, I think." "I'll try and catch him," said Curly. His eyes passed over the new men and he stopped. He glanced coldly at George and then at Lenny. His arms gradually bent at the elbows and his hands closed into fists. He stiffened and went into a slight crouch. His glance was at once calculating and pugnacious. Lenny squirmed under the look and shifted his feet nervously. Curly stepped gingerly close to him. "You the new guys the old man was waiting for?"
Okay, the boss never has a name. They just call him the boss. But this guy, Curly, is his son, and Curly has a name. First name, just like everybody else on the ranch. In yellow, right here, I have his description. And pugnacious, I want you to look up that word, what it means. And you can hear what kind of guy Curly is. Remember, he wears high heel boots, so Curly is definitely short. And remember, Lenny is really, really tall.
"Just come in," said George. "Let the big guy talk." Lenny twisted with embarrassment. George said, "Suppose he don't want to talk." Curly lashed his body around. "By Christ, he's got to talk when he's spoke to. What the hell you getting into it for?" "We travel together," said George coldly. "Oh, so it's that way." George was tense and motionless. "Yeah, it's that way." Lenny was looking helplessly to George for instruction. "And you won't let the big guy talk, is that it?" "He can talk if he wants to tell you anything." He nodded slightly to Lenny. "We just come in," said Lenny softly. Curly stared levelly at him. "Well, next time you answer when you spoke to." He turned toward the door and walked out, and his elbows were still bent out a little. George watched him go and then turned back to the swamper. "Say, what the hell's he got on his shoulder? Lenny didn't do nothing to him." The old man looked cautiously at the door to make sure no one was listening. "That's the boss's son," he said quietly. "Curly's pretty handy, and quite a bit in the ring. He's a lightweight and he's handy." "Well, let him be handy," said George. "You don't have to take after Lenny. Lenny didn't do nothing to him. What's he got against Lenny?" The swamper considered. "Well, tell you what."
Okay, so he's been handy. He's been in the ring. He's a lightweight, so you know that he's a fighter. So you can definitely put that under your description of Curly, and we're going to find out some more information about Curly.
"Curly's like a lot of little guys. He hates big guys. He's all the time picking scraps with big guys. Kind of like he's mad at him because he ain't a big guy. You seen little guys like that, ain't you? Always scrappy." "Sure," said George. "I've seen plenty of tough little guys. This Curly better not make no mistakes about Lenny. Lenny ain't handy, but this Curly punk is going to get hurt if he messes around with Lenny." "Well, Curly's pretty handy," the swamper said skeptically. "Never did seem right to me. Suppose Curly jumps a big guy and licks him. Everybody says what a game guy Curly is. And suppose he does the same thing and gets licked. Then everybody says the big guy ought to pick somebody his own size, and maybe they gang up on the big guy. Never did seem right to me. Seems like Curly ain't giving nobody a chance." George was watching the door. He said ominously, "Well, he better watch out for Lenny. Lenny ain't no fighter. Lenny's strong and quick, and Lenny don't know no rules." He walked to the square table and sat down on one of the boxes. He gathered some of the cards together and shuffled them. The old man sat down on another box. "Don't tell Curly I said none of this. He'd slough me. He just don't give a damn. Won't ever get canned, 'cause his old man's the boss." George cut the cards and began turning them over, looking at each one and throwing it down in a pile. He said, "This guy Curly sounds like a son of a bitch to me. I don't like mean little guys." "Seems to me like he's worse lately," said the swamper. "You got married a couple of weeks ago. Wife lives over the boss's house. Seems like Curly's cockier than ever since he got married." George grunted. Maybe he's showing off for his wife. The swamper warmed to his gossip. "You seen that glove on his left hand?" "Yeah, I seen it." "Well, that glove's full of Vaseline." "Vaseline? What the hell for?" "Well, I'll tell you what. Curly says he's keeping that hand soft for his wife." George studied the cards absorbedly.
Yeah, you heard that right. It's kind of gross, and they're gossiping about Curly and that he only got married a couple of weeks ago. Curly's wife is called Curly's wife, and we'll talk more about how come she doesn't have a name. What do you think? There's this little foreshadowing here with Lenny and Curly. Do you think there's going to be a conflict between the two of them? Is that foreshadowing? Yes, no, maybe. Just think about it and let's listen to the rest of this.
"That's a dirty thing to tell around," he said. The old man was reassured. He had drawn a derogatory statement from George. He felt safe now, and he spoke more confidently. "Wait till you see Curly's wife." George cut the cards again and put out a solitaire lay, slowly and deliberately. "Purty?" he asked casually. "Yeah, purty. But—" George studied his cards. "But what?" "Well, she got the eye." "Yeah? Married 2 weeks and got the eye? Maybe that's why Curly's pants is full of ants." "I seen her give Slim the eye. Slim's a jerk line."
Curly's wife has the eye. What is he talking about when she has the eye and she's given Slim the eye? What are they trying to say here? What does it mean if you give somebody the eye?
"Skinner, hell of a nice fella. Slim don't need to wear no high-heeled boots on a grain team. I seen her give Slim the eye. Curly never seen it. And I seen her give Carlson the eye." George pretended a lack of interest. "Looks like we was going to have fun." The swamper stood up from his box. "Know what I think?" George did not answer. "Well, I think Curly's married a tart."
Look that
"He
word
ain't
up.
the first," said George. "There's plenty that done that." The old man moved toward the door, and his ancient dog lifted his head and peered about, and then got painfully to his feet to follow. "I gotta be setting out the war stations for the guys. Teams will be in before long. You guys gonna buck barley?" "Yeah." "You won't tell Curly nothing I said?" "Hell no." "Well, you look her over, mister. You see if she ain't a tart." He stepped out of the door into the brilliant sunshine. George laid down his cards thoughtfully, turned his piles of 3. He built 4 clubs on his ace pile. The sun square was on the floor now, and the flies whipped through it like sparks. A sound of jingling harness and the croak of heavy-laden axles sounded from outside. From the distance came a clear call. "Stable buck? Oh, stable buck!" And then, "Where the hell's that goddamn nigger?" George stared at his solitaire lay, and then he flounced the cards together and turned around to Lenny. Lenny was lying down on the bunk watching him. "Look, Lenny, this here ain't no setup. I'm scared. You're gonna have trouble with that Curly guy. I've seen that kind before. He was kind of feeling you out. He figures he got you scared. He's gonna take a sock at you the first chance he gets." Lenny's eyes were frightened. "I don't want no trouble," he said plaintively. "Don't let him sock me, George." George got up and went over to Lenny's bunk and sat down on it. "I hate that kind of bastard," he said. "I've seen plenty of 'em. Like the old guy says, Curly don't take no chances. He always wins." He thought for a moment. "If he tangles with you, Lenny, we're going to get the can. Don't make no mistake about that. He's the boss's son. Look, Lenny, you try to keep away from him, will you? Don't never speak to him. If he comes in here, you move clear the other side of the room. Will you do that, Lenny?" "I don't want no trouble," Lenny mourned. "I never done nothing to him." "Well, that won't do you no good if Curly wants to plug himself up for a fighter. Just don't have nothing to do with him. Will you remember?" Sure, George. I ain't gonna say a word. The sound of the approaching grain teams was louder. Thud of big hooves on hard ground, drag of brakes, and the jingle of trace chains. Men were calling back and forth from the teams. George, sitting on the bunk beside Lenny, frowned as he thought. Lenny asked timidly, "You ain't mad, George?" "I ain't mad at you. I'm mad at this here Curly bastard. I hoped we was gonna get a little steak together. Maybe $100. His tone grew decisive. "You keep away from Curly, Lenny." "Sure I will, George. I won't say a word." "Don't let him pull you in. But if the son of a bitch socks you, let him have it." "Let him have what, George?" Never mind. Never mind. I'll tell you when. I hate that kind of guy. Look, Lenny, if you get in any kind of trouble, you remember what I told you to do?" Lenny raised up on his elbow, his face contorted with thought. Then his eyes moved sadly to George's face. "If I get in any trouble, you ain't gonna let me tend the rabbits." "That's not what I meant. Remember where we slept last night? Down by the river?" "Yeah, I remember. Oh, sure, I remember. I go there and hide in the brush." "Hide till I come for you. Don't let nobody see you. Hide in the brush by the river. Say that over." "Hide in the brush by the river. Down in the brush by the river. If you get in trouble. If I get in trouble." A brake screeched outside. A call came. "Stablebuck! Stablebuck!"